Yeah.
All right, we're gonna go ahead and get things kicked off. So I want to welcome everyone today. Thanks for joining us for today's webinar. I'm Abby Lilpop. I'm currently serve as the National Project Coordinator for the Extension Disaster Education Network, otherwise known as EDEN. I'm housed at Purdue University Extension. So if everybody would please take a moment to drop your name and your institution in the chat pod so that we know who's with us today, it'd be greatly appreciated. Today, our presentation is going to be Saving Pets, Saving People, and our speaker is going to be Ragan Adams. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. If you do have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to drop those in that chat box in your Zoom control panel, and I'll bring those up to Ragan at the end of the presentation. I'd also like to note that this webinar is being recorded. So now without further ado, let me introduce you to our presenter. Our presenter today is Ragan Adams. Ragan is a veterinarian and extension specialist for Colorado State University. She's been involved with preparing for animals and disasters across Colorado and devised the video Saving Pets, Saving People to educate communities on this effort. Ragan, I'm going to turn everything over to you.
You can. Hi, everybody, friends, and those of you I don't know. I'm going to do your standard Zoom recall of that. My computer seems to have a poltergeist in it today, but that seems to be part of every Zoom. So let's get started. Anyhow, okay, everybody, it is June, and that means it's Pet Preparedness Month. The purpose of this webinar is to tell you what that means, why is that important, and what action you should take personally as well as in your community to prepare for pets. I don't think there's any doubt that 2020 has been a tough year for many reasons, but we're just going to focus on the weather disasters. This map is from the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration and shows the 22 weather-related disasters costing $1 billion or more in 2020. In my home state of Colorado, we had the worst 3 wildfires in state history, and that factoid doesn't even make it on the map, if that impresses you. The economic cost of these disasters is greatest when people are affected, because the number one priority of response is to save people and their property. Where there are people, though, there are pets. Exact estimates vary, but approximately 50 to 60% of US households have some kind of pet. So when you look at a picture like this of an urban city in the midst of most likely a hurricane and a very bad flood, you realize not only are there a lot of people and a lot of property, but there's a lot of pets. On the AVMA, so with that comment that 50 to 60% of all households probably have a companion animal at some time, this is from data in 2016, showing you the percent of households that had dogs, cats, birds, and horses. Where do you fit in? The emotional bond between people and their pets has elevated the prioritization of saving pets in order to save people. This all began in Hurricane Katrina in 2005, when the way animals were treated, after which the way animals were treated in disasters has changed completely. During Hurricane Katrina, which was a Category 5 hurricane, and it hit directly on New Orleans, which has a population of about 500,000 at the time. It was really one of the biggest hurricanes to hit a major urban metropolitan area ever. More than 1,800 people died. And the response teams were so overwhelmed with rescuing people that pet animals who were considered property were simply not dealt with. Half the people who did not evacuate did so to stay with their pets. And although this estimate is, very hard to defend, 250,000 pets might have died or were stranded in Hurricane Katrina. These kind of signs appeared all over the news. Please, these are grainy pictures, I realize, but I think they really emphasize how important it was to people in these urban areas that their animals were rescued. And they wouldn't leave because they weren't sure that they'd be let into shelters, they'd be taken on transportation if they had dogs or cats with them. Not only was Katrina a sadness for people being separated from their animals. But the animals that were stranded or left behind caused a major public health problem. There were dead carcasses in the streets. There were animals running around hungry, spreading disease, and the whole thing became, as I say, an emotional shock to people as well as public health problem. Soon after Katrina was over, the Pets Act of 2006 was passed by Congress. And that act said that states and counties must have plans to serve the needs of people with household pets and service animals. Such plans must be in place prior to an incident in order to receive FEMA funding. In response to this, passing such an act you might think would have immediate repercussions, but in fact, it's very hard to develop animal disaster plans because of the fact that it takes so much cooperation between animal experts and emergency managers that those things can be awkward to make. In fact, I think a good example of that is that 11 years later, when Hurricane Harvey caused massive flooding in Southeast Texas, the challenge to meet the needs of people with pets was better, but still remains tough. Using data to estimate number of pets involved based on human population, there were likely 600,000 dogs and cats that were affected by Hurricane Harvey. In addition to that, from more reliable data, there were 1.2 million beef cattle and 5,000 dairy cattle that were also involved in Hurricane Harvey. Emergency managers may not have experience with animals, so they depend on people with animal expertise to help make plans for animals in disaster. This statement on the slide was made to me by a first responder back in 2012 when a fire raged for 2 weeks near my town. And it sticks with me and is a reason I preach the importance of preparing for pets at every opportunity. The better a person is prepared, the better we can help them. So what will you do to prepare for your animals? There is no shortage of printed material on preparedness for pets. You can get brochures off the internet from ReadyGov. They have a sort of a pamphlet form that you can fill in. They also have a simple list as identified on this slide about things that you should do, get prepared for in an emergency. Or if you want a longer booklet, the AVMA, that would be the American Veterinary Medical Association, has more detailed pamphlet, which is downloadable from the internet in both English and Spanish. Just Google Saving the Whole Family and it'll pop right up. The challenge, though, is not the knowing what to do, it's the doing it. And so right now, I just want to emphasize to you, it is better to do something than being overwhelmed by the fact that you think you have to do everything. And I think that goes across the board for all kinds of preparations for disaster, but especially so when it comes to animals. So I'm making sort of a list that applies to all species. I don't want to get too deep in the woods because I don't want to deter anybody from starting to plan. As I say, it's better to do one thing than be absolutely panicked by all the things you're supposed to do. So let's start by making your animal disaster plan. So identify your risk. What's the most likely hazard in your community? When might it occur? Although the way the weather's been so crazy in the last few years, it's hardly, we have massive snowstorms in May when they used to stop in March. Last year we had big snowstorm in September, which was nice because it dulled the effect of our 99-degree day the day before. I mean, so when I say that when they might occur, don't depend on that, but it can at least get you into the ballpark. What are the most likely disruptions? Is your weakness that you're apt to have an electrical outage? Are you apt to be caught isolated by some flooding because there's only a few ways in and out of your property? Are you able to transport all your animals? Because remember, when you're having a natural disaster in your area, you can't depend on your friends to come pick up and move your animals. You have to be able to do it yourself. Then once you have your long list of risks, identify your resources. How can you decrease these risks and make, for instance, with electrical outage, having a generator, with inability to transport your animals, you get crates, you get the right kind of cars to take them, or the right kind of trailers. Second basic component of the preparedness plan, and the one I think is really the most important, is your communication setup. Keep yourself informed, make sure that you're signed up for local alerts, but also have backups on how you charge your cell phone, so that's not a reason you get cut off. Make sure that if your cell tower goes down, that you have some kind of background backup like ham radio, a NOAA radio, but you have to make sure that you are connected with the outside so that you know what's going on. And then, as every area has some kind of alert system, so sign up for that. And then also your contact list, which needs to be kept in both in hard copy and electronic forms. That's all those names and addresses of family, and not maybe just your immediate family, but your family outside of your location, so that you can get a hold of them if you need it. All your medical contacts for yourself as well as your animals, and then your community contacts, your friends, your associations, your neighbors down the street that you don't really know, but you want to know in an emergency. Have those names and numbers there. And also your important emergency contacts like sheriff, police, and fire. Second major thing I think is important to do, which is very valuable for in any situation with animals, is having a buddy system. I mean, on a day-to-day level, I'm not sure what I'd do without my buddy system. You get delayed at work, your plane's late from coming back on a trip, and you want to be able to call someone who knows your animals know them, and when they walk in the house, and they got a key to your house or key to your place, when they walk in the house, the animals go, yippee, look who's here, not who the heck is this, I'm guarding the spot, I'm going to bite their head off. Because the animals realize so quickly when things go wrong, and when things start to go wrong, they act differently, they're worried about things, and you just don't want to get them in that chaotic system. So make sure that you have people that know your animals and love your animals. The next sort of group of basic components of your preparedness plan is to identify your animals. Now, of course, the gold standard is microchips, but collars and tags, brand in larger animals or horses, or in a real pinch, you can always spray paint your telephone number on their sides or paint it on their coats. But having the chances of your animals getting separated from you is high in a disaster, and you want to make sure that you can get them back. Another thing to do is have a proof of, is of course some kind of paper proof of ownership, but another one thing is to have a picture of you and your pet together. Now, one of my dogs is your classic black lab with a red collar. And so I could have almost any picture of me with any black lab with collar, and it would look like Bert. So I have a side picture of Bert's, the gray hair he's getting on his toes, which is rather unique. And I think pinpoints him as being my black lab. Packing your ready-go bag is important, your evacuation kit. Again, with sort of household pets or the pets that are larger that are in your backyard, you want to have leashes, bowls, buckets, toys, fly sheets in the case of horses, muzzles in case of that dog that you don't really trust if it's handled by strangers, anything that you can stuffed in your ready-go bag. Also, your medical records in both paper and electronic form, your vaccination history, and the medicines that the animals have. Once a year, I check the medicines in the ready-go bag and make sure that they're up to date, they're still good. Check everything out. You know, usually I do it on April Fool's Day just to make fun of myself, because I would be so stupid if I didn't check them. Medicine, medical records, as I say, treats always help. Brushes, anything that you can that will calm them down. Then the next topic to address is transportation and housing. Crates and carriers are good for small animals, but then also your big animals, you got to make sure you have the right kind of trailers and trucks. They have air in the tire, they got gas in the gas tank, and that you're ready to move your animals on all your animals when you need to. And then finally, food and water that will last at least 3 to 5 days. The water is very important because a lot of times when animals are stressed and they don't like the taste of the water, or where you've taken them, they will stop drinking and then create health problems. Another aspect of preparedness is practice how you would evacuate or shelter in place. These are two things that can happen to you in disasters, and you have to think through the implications of both activities. When it comes, in recent years in Colorado, evacuation notices are put out earlier in the past. Don't be annoyed by this, be thankful, because even if it's unnecessary, to have practiced your evacuation will lead to, will show you things that you've missed and things that you will be happy that you have fixed before the need for evacuation really happens. You and your animals will also be much calmer and better off when the pressure's on. I think it's true no matter the size of your animal, the slower you go, the calmer you are, the quicker you'll get things done. In general, about evacuations, always, if you have animals, always go early. Always do part of the pre-evacuation. Don't wait to the last minute and get stuck in those long lines of cars. Know where you're going, keep paper maps. I know they seem old fashioned, but you never know when the cell tower is going to go down, and routes you can take. Be as self-sufficient as possible. And I would encourage you to make arrangements to stay with family or friends on a private farm or ranch rather than a public shelter. And that's not to diss a public shelter, but it's just safer and calmer for the animals to stay with a private entity. A thing that's occurred, I think, in the last few years that we might be surprised about is that when you are asked to evacuate, oftentimes, like in this picture of people evacuating for Hurricane Irma, that when you had 6.3 people that were ordered to evacuate, the governor then said, don't think we're going to come back and get you if you don't evacuate now. He put a very tight window on, if the winds begin to get higher than 40 miles per hour, we're not coming back to get you. We're not the heroes that are going to save you. And I think that's because they're worried about the safety of the responders. So that's a very important thing to consider. It hasn't always been that way, but it's being more defined that way because our first responders are very important in these disasters, and there's no sense putting them into harm's way. Shelter in place is another thing to think about. We all had sort of shelter in place a bit with COVID in the last 14 or 15 months, and we learned a lot about what our homes were missing, what our food storage was missing, a lot of things like that. So shelter in place is something you have to go through your house and go, what happens if I had to be here for 5 days or a week? Would I have enough food for the animals? Would I have enough food for myself? Or what if I couldn't get back and get my animals? Are there enough? What if my buddy couldn't get back to get with them? Are there enough instructions around my house in plain sight that would say, this is what this animal needs, or this animal is a diabetic, or something like that, and explain how to take care of the animals? If you do have to leave your animals at your home and you aren't with them, it's important to call the Emergency Operations Center at ESF 11 desk and tell them that you have animals left behind in an evacuation area. Oftentimes, first responders will go by and check on them. They'll, animals and livestock and stuff, they'll fill their water buckets and their hay buckets and check on them and things. Or they might even be able to rescue them if it looks like the incident is getting close. Or you may also be able to be escorted in to get to your animals if the risk increases. So make sure you're communicating with the Emergency Operations Center if your animals are alone at home. This is a picture of a hurricane spot, potentially a Katrina, where they go by to see who's left in the houses. And as you can see, they were asked to look for a cat. They couldn't find the dog, left that information on the house. First responders, many of them have their own animals and are happy to help with not only taking care of them and checking on them or helping rescue them. A lot of first responders train with with veterinarians and animal technicians on ways to handle animals in these situations. So as I say, first responders are happy to help with animals, and the more information you leave for them, the better they can help. That's kind of my mantra. This is pictures coming from our flood in 2013 in Colorado, where they took Blackhawks in to rescue people from the foothills because the flooding was so bad, rescuing animals and people together. I made a comment about, trying to maybe avoid public animal shelters. I have to tell you, they're lifesavers, but they also come with some sort of risk. You never know what you're going to get. So communities do the best they can, but the shelters are only temporary and often not ideal. I'm not being critical, but there are problems with temporary shelters that you might be able to avoid. Mixing animals from lots of different properties allow the possibility of disease outbreaks. Animals are almost always in smaller quarters. They get less exercise. They're being handled by strangers, so these are stressful. And they're in constant alert, and this wears on them. They may get fed, have changes in their diet, etc. So if possible, it really is better to hunker down with friends or family where you and your animals can be more relaxed. At these shelters, there's always medical help. There's almost always medical help available, but it's a triage sort of thing. Does this animal need immediate treatment and to be sent to another hospital, or can we take care of it right now? Animals are usually, with the greater needs, are usually shipped off to hospitals if they're available. Returning home is another consideration after a fire, a flood, or something. In the case of fire, smoke affects the health of your animals. There's often ash everywhere. Flooded water, as you know, you can never tell how deep it is or what's in it. You want to walk your land looking for unexpected hazards. Check fence lines. They may look intact, but it might be the uprights are burned at the base and the fencing goes right over. The water quality may not be what you'd hoped. And you can have unexpected animal visitors. After our big floods that I showed pictures of earlier in 2013, Eastern Colorado was just filled with rattlesnakes that had washed down in the water. And one of my greatest moments with Eden was when a group of people from Eden called me up and said, "Well, you're a new Eden delegate. Do you have any problems?" And I went, "Well, there are rattlesnakes everywhere on the Eastern Plains and nobody knows what to do with them." And a friendly voice from Texas gave us a plan, and we were able to deal with all the rattlesnakes thereafter. I'm going to tell you a personal story about going home. This is a little cabin my husband and I built up in the foothills west of Fort Collins. And simple thing, no electricity, no running water, but a nice little timber frame. And we thought we'd done a jolly good job of mitigating around it for normal wildfires. And that was important because it was in the boonies. When one day, about 5 days before a fire hit the spot, the volunteer fire department came by and told us what a good job we'd done mitigating. We were patting ourselves on the back. And then, as I say, a firestorm ran through the area, 70-mile-an-hour winds. When we went back, I was glad we didn't have the dogs that love to play around here so much, because this is what it looked like. And there is no bracing yourself for that sort of thing. This is actually a picture a few days after we had cleaned up the metal that was left, because metal was the only thing that was left. In fact, I had a cast iron frying pan whose sides were melted flat. That would have been a temperature of about 2,000 degrees to do that. And so you can just bet that there was nothing we were going to do with this. But you don't want your animals running around in places like this until you've checked it out for hazards and made sure things are really clean. And also, they're a horrible distraction. When you see something like this, you can't really believe it, and you're not exactly at your best. In summary, on personal preparedness for your pets, it is worth it. Your pets are part of the whole family. They rely on you in good times and bad. They comfort you in times of despair. And so it's very important to be sensitive about how much they mean to people. Now we're going to change our direction a tad from personal preparedness for your family of pets to community preparedness, because both of them are important to have the animal community taken care of during a disaster. The community, and so the four pillars or the four things we think of with disaster animal planning are that animal owners make preparations for themselves, that they are self-sufficient, that the community makes plans for all the animals in the community, trying to figure out, what kind of animals do we have? Do we have mostly beef cattle that we have to take care of, or people's pets? Do we have a zoo that might need some help, or should we go talk to them about making a special plan? In our community, we have a wolf habitat that has to move every once in a while when there's fires up in the foothills. But you need to think of all the different kinds of groupings of animals that you have in your community. And then form, not only, it's very easy to take the animal annex of your county's emergency operation plan and say, oh, small animals, that'll be the Humane Society. Large animals, maybe that'll be the horse people. But then those people have to go and build out a plan to be able to do the responsibility that their name is associated with. And that's another step. It takes a lot of diligence. Part of that step is also making a community animal response team, a CART, or in some communities it's called a DART, a disaster animal response team, with people that are trained and credentialed to help. It's sometimes not every county may have one of these, but you might develop regional ones in your states that can move around to different counties where different disasters are located. And then finally, after all that planning, the point is to practice with tabletops, with exercises. As we speak today, I have two veterinary students that are in Pitkin County, Colorado, doing this really exciting. They're doing a full-time real animal sheltering exercise to make sure that that county is prepared for the up and coming wildfires we expect. I'm going to do a little whatever you call it, marketing for a project that was done at Colorado State University several years ago, in which we had worked at the time with 20 some counties developing disaster animal plans. And the extension agents were the leads on it, getting all the people together to make the plans that fit those counties. We made this 15-minute video, Saving Pets, Saving People. And what the video is about is two different counties, how they identified what the needs in their community were, and how they solved that. One of the counties was very rural, the other is a combination of urban and rural, so their challenges were different and their resources were different. And the video speaks from the voices of the people that were doing it. There's no moderation about the way you should do it. It's watching communities make up their own answers. And then on the right here is creating a community animal disaster plan. That's a toolkit, and it's written not for FEMA level people, but for community people to understand how you get a group together to solve the problems that the community has around animals and the challenges. They're on that website, or you can Saving Pets, Saving People, you can Google, and it's on YouTube. Love to have you use it as a sort of introduction to your communities. This is what we're going to try to do. It's really based, though, on each community does it their way with what they have to do it with. And I encourage you to use that if you would like. As I had said before, one of the most interesting things about animal disaster planning, it is truly a collaborative effort, because the animal people need to know what the emergency people know, and the emergency people need to know what the animal people know. And a lot of times we start out seeing very differently, And then we got to get on the same bandwagon and work together, knowing everybody has a different perspective on the issue, but every perspective is important. There's sort of 3 stages of the disaster animal plan that you think of. First are your goals in the short term, encouraging early evacuation of people with pets so the animals don't get so riled up, providing safe shelter for the animals, triaging them, making sure that they're evaluated, treated, and you know, sometimes treatment is euthanasia because there isn't a facility to take the animal to. But you know, we're worrying about health and welfare here. Of course, in the short term, we need to make sure everyone's cared for, fed, exercised, and there's minimize the disease transmission, I think is the best way to do it, to speak about it. And support animals that are sheltering in place. As I say, there'll be both large livestock operations, zoos, dairies, and in the wildfire area, or the disaster area, there apt to be those animals that are left behind that the first responders can keep their eyes on. Midterm in an incident, the major goals are dealing with the displaced and injured wildlife. In my area, you get moose flushed out, you get cougars, you get rattlesnakes, you get everything flushed out down into the cities on the Front Range when you have a wildfire up in the foothills. Stray animals will emerge looking for food and shelter. And then, as I had mentioned before, there'll be public health concerns. Carcass disposal, disease transmission, those things tend to brew in the middle of a disaster, animal-oriented disaster. And then the long term is rebuilding the animal community. You might have 4-H kids that have lost all their projects. You may have just any disruption of the normal animal community that you want to repair. And then there's finding permanent homes for surrendered animals and displaced people with animals. You know, it's hard to find places to live that will let you bring your animals, or harder than just finding a place to live. So that causes a lot of people to have to give up their animals to animal shelters. I think the story I've heard of the most massive account of this was a tornado that went through Joplin, Missouri. And this is before I was in the biz, so I'll get these numbers. I don't want to quote numbers because I'll get them wrong, but I think they had their animal shelter up for 2 weeks. But because this tornado just wiped out so much housing, a lot of people had to give their animals up. And there was a national, finally they had to close the shelter, but they had all these animals they needed to find homes for. And so they did a really regional and maybe even a national broadcast for, we need people to come adopt animals. And people came into Joplin and just out of the goodness of their heart, adopted animals left and right and found them homes. But it's sometimes not quite that easy. I think I'll repeat again as I draw to a close, my favorite phrase: the better prepared the animal owner is, the better we can help them. I hope that you can see that this kind of phrase could motivate you to prepare for your own animals and help your community prepare for its cumulative animals. The other thing I'd like to thank before I take any questions is to thank both Incident Command, who really is beginning to understand about the importance of animals. At least in our fire season in the last couple of years, they've been so sensitive to understanding, say, where cattle are on federal lands, how to get them out safely. And that hasn't always been true. We have promoted in Colorado, and I highly suggested, liaisons between the ag that can act between the ag community and the Incident Command, so that the Incident Command can have a greater understanding of the animals that are in the area. I'd also like to thank firefighters because they are so wonderful about taking care of and rescuing animals. And finally, community animal response teams, which are wonderful volunteers that work in sheltering and helping with evacuation. And on that note, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Reagan. We'll go ahead and take some of the questions now. Just a reminder to please go ahead and type those into the chat box in your control panel. So I can go ahead and read those to Reagan, or feel free to unmute yourself and do your video if you have that capability. So far in the chat pod, I did drop the 2 links to that toolkit and to the video for anybody to go ahead and click directly to those. And then Deborah Sweeten did offer up to us that she was in Joplin during the tornado and actually worked in that emergency shelter for a couple of weeks.
Oh, great. How many, could she tell us how many animals? I mean, there was this huge number of animals that they had to get rid of. I'd love to hear her experience.
Oh, goodness. I don't have a count on the number of, it's been so long ago, I don't remember that. But it,
Good, I'm glad I'm not the only one who doesn't.
it was a lot. They had just fairly recently opened up a new Humane Society location for their animal, regular one. And it just so happened that just across the parking lot was a warehouse, a big empty warehouse that they were able to negotiate with, and allowed us to use their space for the emergency sheltering operations. And that was full. We had that full of dogs and cats that we'd set up. I don't recall what they did with, they weren't with horses or livestock. That wasn't part of the emergency shelter that I was at, that I recall. But yeah, they had the warehouse, and which actually there were a couple of them, so that the bulk of the administrative and where all the donated food and other supplies were in one building, and that required a whole staff of volunteers just to manage that aspect of the incoming donations, and getting all that sorted out and organized. And then the other warehouse building was again for the dogs and the cats, and they had a large grassy area that we're able to use for taking the animals out for walking. I also recall it was the heat stroke for the volunteers as well as the animal was always an issue. And so, how we deal with that and manage to, trying to keep people from experiencing those kind of complications as well is always an issue during those emergency shelter operations.
Definitely are. Health of people is a one health event for sure. There's no question about that. Well, thanks for sharing.
I also remember, Reagan, like you said, the National was involved with the adoption. It seemed like it was about a month, maybe 6 weeks after the initial tornado, that we had the big adoption day, and people came from all over the country to adopt. And they, if I recall, we were running low, but we had the bulk of the adoptions were done by noon that day. There was such a great response from around the country.
It was that I'll always remember that, and that was quite some time ago. So if you advertise it well and organize it right, you can find a home for these animals for sure. But it's part of the show. You're going to get left. You're going to get left with one for sure. So thanks for that contribution. Ruth, you have your hand up and you're walking around, so I know you're a busy person.
So yeah, I have a couple questions. A few years ago, I ended up doing livestock evacuation for it was a big fire for us in our area. And it was like totally, I was on vacation and ended up moving 18 hogs and went from there. And I finally have support from Extension on getting prepared for the next fire season. My question is, you have so many people come in that want to volunteer, right? They want to help. And I'm working on putting together a brief training for volunteers, like the rules you have to follow. We aren't veterinary caring, right? We're not doing animal neglect cases. Like, how do you put together a brief, concrete training? Do you have any suggestions that would cover those topics?
Well, certainly. And you know, in a 45-minute presentation, I'm trying to be broad enough because
Right.
the weeds are deep.
Right,
So thank
right.
you for that question. Again, I think the most important thing is to think about your local group and how you talk to them. What do they respond to? I know that in the county where I live in, Larimer County in Colorado, they have a very sophisticated group of volunteers that also volunteer in their shelter, and they have tried to match what they do in their shelter, their permanent shelter, with their temporary shelter, so that they don't get caught. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I mean, I'd love to, if you could leave me with your email, I'd be happy to send you some examples. And some of them are so simple because they're basic, just human animal health things, and
Right.
a liability form, so that you work with your county with to make sure that nobody gets sued. A
Right.
rabies, a plan, what to do with somebody when somebody gets bitten. This is the way you will behave. You will leave your, nowadays, I always encourage people to make sure people aren't using their cell phones to take photographs of things in animal shelters, because they can be misconstrued.
Correct. Yeah.
You want to make sure that you have the area guarded so that nobody can steal animals. That happens quite commonly. You know, you just lift yourself a nice puppy you like or something like that and disappear. And then I think it's very important to get the people credentialed, so that they have tags that say that they are supposed to be there, who they are, and they aren't just somebody that's dropped in to, you know, see what's going on. So credentialing them, human safety, animal safety, liability are some key things. And then from there, you could build on, you know, how the procedures are done, how handling is done. But that can get, you know, almost like an encyclopedia.
Right. And luckily I grabbed your email. I'll be emailing you later today. I have a very good team. I work for 4-H, so I've got 4-H volunteers already on board. And interestingly enough, I have a meeting. We're starting a cart. And I have a meeting on Thursday with with the sheriff's office. And if I can get that liability form, that would be great, because I'm really encouraging them. Last time they were like, oh, you've got this, you run it. And
Right.
nothing went wrong, thank goodness. But I really want them on board this time, to the point where I've told them, if I don't have some backing from you, you might not see me. Like,
Right. No, you really, you know, we've had enough practice at this now. We, you know, Katrina's a long time ago. We realized how you do it on the, you know, with spontaneous, unaffiliated volunteers, right? We call them SUVs. And they usually, and sorry, this is extension group, so I can say this. They usually put their underpants over their regular pants and act like suit and wear capes. And they're a pain in the neck. Although they also are wonderful. I mean, you love them, but you want to then try to organize them. So
right.
I think a basic organization, my experience with 4-H crowd is that you're safest if you get an experienced 4-H leader connected with every 4-H kid to minimize minimize stuff, because the kids may not. Yeah.
My main is our livestock, my main volunteer on the evacuations is our large livestock superintendent. And she also is a mental health worker. So I've got the best of both. I told her until I retire. So.
No, that's absolutely great. Well, I wish you the best of luck, Ruth. And I'd be happy to talk to you more, you know, give you some examples. And because I personally have found out, you know, there's no absolute way to do it. It's the way that works for your community. And it's helpful to have somebody to talk that through with, you know, like, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? So please contact me if you'd like to.
I will do that. Thank you so much.
Sure. Any other questions? I can't hear you.
I'm on mute. So we actually have several. One, Sherry Nelson did ask if we can provide a PDF of this PowerPoint. Reagan and I are working on trying to get that sent between us. We can go ahead and post that as well. So hopefully, yes, soon.
I think that's on your Google, that should be in your Google Drive by now, I think.
Okay, perfect. And Matt Bauer said the 0.7 households with equids seems low. Would it would seem that this is an average of urban and rural properties. Would that number be higher if we look just at rural communities?
I couldn't hear what animal you're talking about.
Equids?
Oh, horses.
Yeah.
Horses. I'm sure that was a meme. That was a national meme. So it's a combination of urban and rural. And I agree it would be, I hope you don't have 0.5 horses running around your property, because we all know that horses are herd animals and they don't really like to be alone. They like to be at least together with somebody else. So yes, that most likely is a national number.
And then Cheyenne discussed that her grandmother was evacuated during the Pigeon Forge and Gatlinburg fires a few years ago. Was able to tell some really sad stories about those who were evacuated, but first responders would not let them take the pets with them as they were not welcome at that shelter. Can you talk more about the rulings or what changes and protocols were changed following Katrina, and how people could be advised as to what to expect or what to advocate for at their local shelters?
Great question. No, that's a wonderful question. The only thing that happened, Katrina, was that this Pets Act said that counties and states needed to prepare for people's household pets and service animals. So household pets, the common ones, dog, cats, not pythons, not necessarily birds, but dogs, cats, small mammals, that sort of thing. Because you do take there's a special expertise to taking care of a tropical bird or something like that. And you can't necessarily expect every county to be able to do those things or to be able to take care of your pet alligator, something like that. So if you have an unusual household pet, you really need to make adjustments and plans for them and not depend on anybody else, because it's just, counties can't do that. The household pets and service animals, in some communities, a household pet will be your flock of chickens. It will be your pet your pet potbelly pig. It may be the mini goats that are running around your backyard. But you should call if you have that kind of, herd of pets, you should call your emergency manager, find out who's in charge of the sheltering, and call them up and saying, will I be able to bring my chickens? Will I be able to bring these sort of unusual household pets? Or you make, what I think is a better thing to do, is you make arrangements with someone that lives on the other side of town or 20 miles away, and you agree that they can shelter at your house if the incident occurs at their house, and vice versa, so that you have this sort of spider web of a buddy system in your community. But if you don't have that, then call the emergency manager, find out who's in charge of the sheltering and what their capacity is. Also, I think it's important to not take personally if the people have not planned for your kind of animal. They are planning within their resources, and they may not have the resources to take care of a wide breadth of animals. So that's planning ahead. The other thing is there are no continuous rules of the standard of care that has to be there. There are multiple kinds of human shelters, shelters that are only people only, but they have to let service animals in. Then there are shelters where the animal shelter is right next door to the human shelter. And then there's human shelters where they let you bring your animals in. This summer, because of COVID, very interestingly, a lot of counties, because of COVID, didn't want to have congregate shelters, right, where every mass sheltering, where the people sheltered together. So they would rent motels, especially because people weren't traveling as much. The motels loved this, and give a family a room or 2 rooms. So your cat, your dog, it's just like a mini house or something, but you're in a hotel room. And that was very slick. The irony is, I think in a lot of situations, once people start moving again, that won't be an easy thing to do because hotels will be full. But right now, before the season, in the winter, is when you go and call those people up and ask them very kindly, how do you plan to do this, so that you can fill the gaps if indeed they're not meeting your needs. If you'd like to talk about that further, as I say, my contact sheet's up here. I see Connie Burnham has her hand up. Hey, Connie, what's up?
Hey, good afternoon. I was just going to make a comment about the federal law, and our understanding is that when you're planning to set up a human shelter, you have to have a plan to accommodate the animals that are listed within the federal law. So a lot of, I don't think a lot of emergency managers really kind of get that. But that really is, something that has to be done, because if they don't, then again, they come back and want federal dollars to help pay for things. And they're going to say, well, they may say, hey, you didn't do this, or, whatever. And it does cause a lot of problems if you don't have a way of taking care of those animals. And then, even if they're not included under the Pets Act, of course, what you're saying is vitally important, is that people need to figure out what are they going to do with animals, if being a pet, or even if it's your livestock, or, whatever it is. You have to be able to have a plan to be able to move them to safety, if that's important to you. And if you are someone who cares about your livestock and your pets and things like that. So anyway, I just wanted to add a couple comments. You did a great presentation. I really enjoyed it. I know some about this, but it's always good to hear others' perspective on these situations. So thanks.
Well, thank you, Connie. As you know, I can talk about it forever. So I tried to slide it down.
Very good.
We do still have a few more in the chat pod. Deborah, I had a follow-up question of, do you have any info on the percentage of responders who are volunteer, and what training requirements are now required for I'm assuming this is volunteers in the shelter, or are these on fire service? I don't know. Any idea what the average rate of retention of these volunteers is? Do they remain active 5, 10?
Well, I don't know anything about, I don't have a good sense of volunteer fire departments. I understand. I assume that varies. That varies by the size of the county, by the population, by just so many things. I'm afraid I couldn't find that out. Now, I couldn't tell you anything intelligent. Is there a reason that you're asking that question that might help me understand how I might explain things a little bit more?
Regan, no, I was just interested in, just curious, and mostly referring to volunteers who volunteer with the animal response teams. I know there's the local animal response teams, and then there's the state ones, and even the broader, across the nation ones.
Right. So I would like to comment on that. The broader teams, like the National Veterinary Response Team, they are having a hard time keeping their group together at this point in time. I think the strongest teams are teams that are based in counties and in regions, because people know each other, and there's a camaraderie about the teams that are lost when individuals gather, once every year or once every 2 years to respond. They haven't necessarily had the funding so that they can train together, They may have similar knowledge, but they haven't gotten to be that working machine. Whereas at a county level, you can get your animal response team to practice once a month, to come to lectures. I show them my Saving Pets, Saving People video. You know, you can have veterinary chats, that kind of things. Because the key to those response teams is the camaraderie, because they certainly are not getting paid. They're doing it because they believe in it and because they like what they're doing together. So building that at the local level is exceedingly important. That said, the big response teams, and especially the ones run, I mean, the one I'll mention the most is Texas A&M, and they have an amazing extension veterinary team for animal response, and they're requested all over the country to come help with big incidents. But again, that team trains together. They have built a camaraderie, and then they can, and a depth, which is really remarkable. And it would probably be in a, you know, I've tried to make that happen at other places because I think that would be helpful, but Texas A&M definitely, you know, holds the bar for how to do that. But even then, when there is that camaraderie, every community will have their response team be doing great and then losing interest, and then doing great and then losing interest. So that's keeping the old cheerleading part of having everybody engaged is very important.
Is Texas A&M associated with the extension?
Oh, they have a very strong extension set. They have a very strong and wonderful extension group.
Okay.
The combination of the students from the vet school and the faculty members from the vet school combined with the extension agents are just a very powerful group. I see somebody from Houston smiling. Would you like to share your experience with them? You're on mute, I think.
Yep, and yep, yes, I was. Okay. So yes, I've been on the disaster area on their team for the past couple of years in their committee, and we've met, and so they've been very responsive, very fast in getting to the needs of Houstonians, and also when they had the fires in California. So when we get updates from them, we also partner with them, Prairie View A&M University, in knowing what they do, what they have done, and also planning and then pre-planning. Everything revolves around planning to make sure they execute their agents in where they need to be, you know, and especially in this season being hurricane season. So yeah, just kudos to them and our team for just everything that they do. And so, yeah, yes.
And kudos back to you for all the stuff you guys have been through. I saw your Healthy Houston initiative in the background. I was going, ooh, that's a tough place.
Yeah.
But thank you for being part of this, and thanks for listening today.
Thank you for having us. Appreciate it.
There was a quick question regarding Missouri and Joplin, wondering if you happen to know if there was an after action report or a summary, a white paper that might be of interest to show those that are working on their local plans.
Well, there's almost always an after action report, so I'm sure it's somewhere, but I would start by going to the Joplin, you know, city government and asking them if they had it, because I certainly haven't seen one race around.
And I guess also to add to that, I may just say that whomever asked that question, there have been a few others in the chat pod that have referenced either working in Joplin during that time or being from Missouri, that maybe there could be a connection made. I'll leave the private chat open here for a little bit if you guys want to connect and share information. If anybody local to Missouri may have some more information on that to share.
And, you know, once they bring up that after action report, that is just a wonderful place for learning. And if they're, I admire so much emergency responders and managers, the way they handle those after action reports, because people are not, it's understood that everybody was stressed. There was a new challenge. You did the best you can, and you try to figure out what you can learn from it. And I sort of think our whole civilization could benefit from that kind of evaluation of how we do things. The way an after action or a hot wash happens.
And Keegan and Brigitte both chimed in. One saying to contact ASPCA Community Relations, that they were the primary organizer with Joplin Humane Society on that adoption event. And then Brigitte says the Missouri State Emergency Management Office in Jeff City should also have a copy of that report if anybody would like it.
You know, that's a benefit of having a lot of people on an Eden call. Somebody knows an answer. Together,
Somebody knows somebody.
Yeah, individually, we can be real stupid, but I got a lot of smart people on speed dial.
So another question. I work with 4-H youth programs. For when the kids have poultry, rabbits, livestock at fair, what type of and how much emergency prep would be recommended for the kids to know so that they have properly prepared with their exhibits during fair? A couple years ago in a Kansas County fair, a microburst hit the livestock building, tumbling the poultry and rabbit cages, and some got loose, etc. Any recommendations on the type of preparedness that we could be teaching our 4-H youth?
Whoa, that's a very specific question and quite a nightmare event. I can just see it. I think the most important thing to do in that circumstance is just, there's good husbandry things that would be part of knowing that you locked every cage that the animals were in when you left it. Same thing with stall doors. So you don't really have to get, kids are so ramped up at county fair that I hate to get them psyched up even more about, and then a tornado could come through at any time, because that just sets them off, the walls. But if they have the basic things, are their animals identified? For instance, their horses microchipped, maybe their rabbits microchipped. Are they closing the cages? Are they paying attention? Are they feeding them? Are they making sure that they have water? All good, solid husbandry things that would apply anytime they go away from home, and keep them focused on that, because there's enough hype at a fair not to emphasize disaster too much, but just solid, good husbandry. And I can say, if you do have older 4-H kids that might be interested in disaster, learning about disaster preparedness, that My PI program, which is out of Mississippi, has evidently, that's a wonderful program and very interesting to sort of older 4-H kids who want to take some responsibility for what happens in their communities. So look into My PI. It doesn't say that much about ag and animals, but I know in Colorado I've added ag and animal modules, to certain, especially in the rural communities, and they've been appreciated. But it's a great tool for teaching the 13 to 17-year-olds responsibility.
This is Ruth in Oregon real quick. I'm actually a My PI instructor. And I will put my email in the chat box if anybody wants to contact me about putting together trainings. We've done a couple successful Zoom ones.
Oh, it's a great one. We've had, I think it's a great program for really upping the ante to that sort of 14 to 17-year-old. I'm going to take responsibility if they aren't distracted by livestock projects.
Right. But what I've noticed too is that the adults that they talk to about being prepared are more willing to listen to youth than they are to me. So it's really interesting that the adults will pay more attention to a teenager talking to them about it.
Well, that's the purpose of 4-H, right? That's
Yes.
the purpose. That's the theory behind 4-H. It's worked
Yes.
for quite a few years.
Yep. The My PI has been really valuable in our community.
Yeah, that's great.
Right. Well, we are a little after 2 o'clock right now. I appreciate everyone for attending today's webinar. I am going to drop a quick link here into the chat pod for a brief evaluation of this webinar. It should only take you just a couple of moments. You could all please go ahead and do that for us. Again, thank you to Ragan for her presentation. Thank you to all of you that asked questions and had a great conversation following that. Today was, I think, a really great webinar and professional development opportunity for all of us. So again, we appreciate you taking your time out of your day. Our next Eden Professional Development webinar is, sorry, I'm on the wrong date. It's going to be on July 13th, and it's on urban canopies. So please keep a lookout in your email for updates about that. This recording will soon be posted to our Eden YouTube channel, and then hopefully posted into the webinar section of our website. If you have any further questions, please feel free to email Ragan at her contact information she has provided, or myself, which is whom you received your invitation or notices from, and I'll go ahead and get all those messages to Ragan. But again, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Stay safe, you guys. Get prepared. Take care of your animals. Bye-bye. Thanks so much.